the equal concern or even a bigger concern to that was the AFLW is a year old. We don't want this sideshow destroying it. And they were worried about the commercial viability and the commercial impact that my playing would have.
Hannah Mouncey, Australian women's and men's handball star, former VFLW player, seen on 60 Minutes, but more to the point, open mic. Welcome to the SAC podcast.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey, you won't meet two middle-aged men, probably less equipped to tackle all these issues, but we'll do it with an open heart and really interested in your story. At a time when trans rights have become a political footy across the world. Why are you so keen to keep advocating for trans issues?
Look, I think as much as anything, there's no interest like self-interest. So that's probably one good reason. But I think it's something that it's funny. Over time, usually things move forward, but instead we're actually seeing things go backwards a really long way. And I even look, 7 or 8 years ago, the conversations that were being had around trans people, they were a lot more progressive than they are now. And especially laws and things like that around the world too. And this is outside sport, obviously, but there's a sporting element to it. But places like, the UK, especially in the US, there's a lot of, issues around access to healthcare where 10 years ago there was no issues and they're now off no scientific basis whatsoever. It's more ideological. There's a lot of bans coming in and restrictions to healthcare and stuff like that, which actually does a lot of harm to a lot of people. So I think it's just something where, two, there's a very vocal minority who have a very big platform and they're the ones whose voices are often heard. And the people who are affected by it generally don't actually get to have a say. So I figure if I've got a little bit of a platform, then it's worth saying something and just keeping the other side of the conversation out there, I think.
It must be incredibly hard, that situation. Like, I think it was almost a decade ago that you decided to transition. Like, as you said, now it's gone the other way, hasn't it? And how does that affect, not just yourself, but so many other people in similar situations?
Yeah, it's a strange one because no one even a decade ago, like very few people knew what transgender meant. It wasn't something that was out there in the conversation really until Caitlyn Jenner went through her transition. That was the first time anyone got real exposure to it in the mainstream, I think. And initially there was a real surge of, I guess, support for trans people, and especially seeing her story. I think that was put out there, and it was the Vanity Fair cover and all that sort of thing. And that was the first time a lot of people had actually heard of trans people. I know that growing up, I didn't know the term transgender until I was in my 20s. And I'm only 35. It's not that long ago where people had no idea what this was. And the only time you would see something that was remotely similar to even touching on trans issues was on Jerry Springer. And usually that was not particularly flattering. And it also wasn't trans people. It was, it was the freak show coming out, and they were trying to profit off people who, were really quite troubled. But that, you had all sorts of people going on there and all sorts of things, and that was all people saw. So it's been very quick to come to prominence. There was a small time where things were really progressive and actually things were looking quite positive. And then I think we saw around the world, the gay marriage vote was largely lost by those who were opposing it, and they needed someone else to beat up on, and that was us. So it's then gone backwards very, very quickly. And the impact it has, I think on people like me who have been through it and have been through accessing healthcare and things like that, that's largely in the past for me, so it doesn't affect me too much. But I also know what it's like on the other side of it, where you're trying to navigate who you are. You're terrified, absolutely terrified of rejection and what people will think of you, and the self-esteem issues too. Like, you're brought up thinking that this isn't normal. And so, you think you're a monster, really, and like you're a freak and this and that. And the conversations being had in the media only serve to propagate that now. So if you're a young trans person or a trans person of any age and you're hearing the conversations now, that can only lead to people feeling more depressed, more anxious, more isolated, withdrawing more, and doing a lot of damage. And look, that's not to say that people who have transitioned and don't have those barriers to healthcare are immune to it. But my thoughts immediately go to the people who are where I was, up until the age of 25, trying to figure out who they are and trying to actually be comfortable with it.
We'll go into your story a bit and, the AFL draft and obviously your handball aspirations. But what is it that you think that trans people are being banned from elite sport for? Is it a safety concern? Is it a cultural concern? Or is it a fairness thing, given that, trans athletes are going to, start dominating world sport?
Yeah, I think there's a combination. I think largely it's ideological. I think largely there's people who don't want trans people in sport, don't like trans people in society, because it isn't just a sport issue. And sport is just one of the places where they're being affected. And also, I think there's a hell of a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there around the way hormone treatment affects your body. There's all sorts of misinformation around studies that have been done showing what happens to your body during transition and performance. And a lot of people don't understand that because they're not given the information, and that's fair enough. If you're not given the information, you can't be expected to understand it. But I think it's just part of a broader move against trans people. And I think if you look at the world, it's going more and more to the right. And, that's just the way the world's going. So I think, there is obviously a fairness element to it. And I'm a big believer in that there has to be restrictions there. I've always advocated for that. I've never said there shouldn't. But I think where the IOC is now, where they're going, your 12 to 24 months of hormone treatment, that's pretty spot on. And I say that as someone who's been through it. I can tell you, like, when I started hormone treatment, that was a month after we got back from Qatar, and we'd been over there trying to qualify for the Olympics for Rio. And so as a result, we'd done some testing before that. And before we left, so this is in the start of November of 2015, I squatted, in 2015, I'd squatted 200 kilos, benched 150, and cleaned 140, which are pretty big numbers. They're not small. But within 12 months, pretty much everything had dropped off by about 2/3 across the board. So I know that, my squat had dropped down to about 60 or 65 maybe. My bench had dropped to 50. I know that because I wasn't doing 2 plates anymore, and that was a real shock. Because, yeah. And then my clean, God, that was even worse. Like, that was like 55 or something. It was a huge drop. And I don't think people understand that. And that's because you remove testosterone from the body, and that has an impact across the board. You lose a lot of weight very quickly. I was pretty built. And I lost 20 kilos rapidly.
Where are you at right now? So you're a member of the women's handball team, the Australian women's handball team. You could qualify for the LA Olympics, but you might be banned from entering America, given a potential Trump ban. Now, as in 2032, if you're still around, which you'd hope to be for the Brisbane Olympics, Australia will have a team in that competition, given, of course, we're the host nation. But potentially you might be banned as a transgender athlete, given the IOC's working towards more concrete bans. Is that the right way to sum it up?
So, yeah, it seems like that's where they're going at the moment, is they're looking at probably a blanket ban across the board, and not just for trans athletes, but intersex athletes. Or I shouldn't say total ban, but they'll be forced to, it seems like they'll be forced to compete in the men's competition. But yeah, like I'm playing for Australia at the moment. I've played for the women's team for the last 8 years now, 7 or 8 years now. And I've had no issues really at all, especially from overseas. I've been very open about it with the International Federation, because obviously you have to be, and they've been really fantastic. The Asian Handball Federation, no issues at all whenever we compete in Asia at Asian championships and stuff like that. So they've had no issues. And none of the teams we've played against in those competitions have ever raised any concerns or issues at all. It's actually the opposite. I've had, and from countries where people might, profile people as being more conservative and having issues with trans people. Like I've had such positive responses from, some of the girls from Iran and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And
so the IOC potentially within months, I know there's a working party there, you could be banned from competing in the Olympics, but also just in the national competition.
Yeah,
for Australia, yeah.
Yeah, I expect to probably be banned by the end of the year, if I'm honest. Yeah, I think so. But it also gives us time to, if there's, because I'm sure there'll be challenges coming for it. Like there just will be. And I also could be wrong on that. They could come back and surprise us. But I think that the issue that we've got, if they do go down the path of blanket bans, is, it's banning people for what is essentially a medical issue. So I think one of the biggest issues is we need to reframe how we look at trans people. The general Jerry Springer explanation was, this is a woman or a man trapped in a man's or a woman's body, and they're trying to fix it. But and they're choosing to change gender. But the way we need to understand it is, and the way I explain to it is, you've got congenital abnormalities, cleft palates, people with holes in their heart, things like that. This is no different. What you've got is people who are born with brain of male, female, doesn't matter, and they're literally just born with the wrong genitals. The only problem is they can't tell you that when they're born, whereas you can pick up a cleft palate, you can pick up all that sort of stuff. And it's the only one where you limit access to healthcare until they're older. And fair enough, like that's not an issue. I'm not complaining about that. But, there's been studies done, MRIs, all sorts of things where they're actually mapping, trans women's brains, trans men's brains, and comparing it to cisgender, which is basically just people who are, the gender they were assigned at birth. So if they're male, they're male. If they're female, they're female. And what they're finding is trans women's brains line up almost exactly in terms of mapping and all that sort of thing as cisgender females' brains, and the same for trans men and cisgender men. And not just and I'm not super into this, but I was looking at it last night. It's not just the way the brain works and the mapping and all that sort of stuff. It's actually the thickness of certain areas of the brain and things like that as well. So this is not a choice that people are making. This is actually a biological, congenital abnormality, birth defect in, I guess, the old term, that just needs to be corrected like anything else. If someone had a cleft palate or a hole in their heart, you'd look to fix it. And I guess the only problem with this is, this is one that makes you grow differently, and it's not the person's fault. And I think the problem we're looking at with this, if they go down blanket bans, is you're banning someone from competing who's done nothing wrong. This is no fault of their own. They haven't done anything to cheat the system. Whereas then if I look at it in terms, if they're worried about a performance advantage, people who have willingly gone out and doped and been found guilty of doping, they're allowed to compete again after 4 years. So you're automatically saying that, and if I look at the ban for doping, it's 4 years, it used to be 2. Now, in that, there's obviously an element that's a punishment. And if they're allowing them to compete after 4 years, I can only assume that that means they feel that any advantage they got from doping has now gone and it's back to a level playing field after 4 years. So, if you say that, they've maybe bumped it up by a year or 2 as an extra punishment to deter people, if they're still looking at banning people for doping and allowing them to compete after 4 years, automatically that tells me if you're looking at putting restrictions on trans people, it has to be less than 4 years because they've actually done nothing wrong. Whereas people who are doped have gone out of their way to cheat the system.
Tell us a bit about your personal journey. So handball from 2009 onwards, you played 22 games for the Australian men's team. Pardon me, represented Australia in the 2013 Men's Handball Championships. And I think it's around that time that you confessed to your mum or tell your mum, through Facebook Messenger during a tournament where you're having panic attacks. Mum, this is who I am. Tell us about.
Yeah, it was a bit later. So I was really lucky. Like I grew up, first saw handball at Sydney Olympics when I was 11 and absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. And I was actually really lucky later on. I got to play against some of those players that we watched at those Olympics, which was very cool. But I'd always been very into sport. And, I'm very much typical story of trans people where I knew I was different from a very, very young age. But
How young would you say? How young?
4, 5, 6, around then, from a very young age. But you also know, like, oh, okay, boys are boys, girls are girls. Let's not cross that. It's that whole thing that you grow up with. And so, I was always very into sport, and I sort of threw myself into that. I think even again from a really young age to sort of run away from it and build a lot of self-esteem, because I didn't, knowing that I was that different, I didn't feel particularly great about myself, and I couldn't put into words what it was. Like, I mean, I definitely could, but I didn't know what trans people were until I was in my 20s.
So what would you have said if you had to put it into words?
Well, I remember thinking, I was like, I'm a girl, but I also knew that was impossible.
Yeah.
So you're not going to say anything because you think people think you're crazy, and you'll just be told.
Yeah, so
no,
you don't tell anyone. You're just dealing with this in your own mind for a long period of time.
Yeah, and so I really threw myself into sport, I think, to build a lot of self-esteem in myself, because that's where I got all of it. And so, I grew up playing cricket, and when we lived in Sydney, I had to play soccer because I wanted to play rugby league, but Mum hates it. So she grew up in Melbourne, so she's AFL. And so, but then we moved to Albury when I was 10 or 11, and I was 11, and we started playing football. I started playing football. And so I wasn't particularly great at football to begin with because I was so far behind everyone else. But cricket was my thing. And so I always threw myself into that. And then over time, I got a lot better at football. But those first couple of years, I was pretty bad. And then by the time I got to under 18s and playing seniors and stuff, I was pretty sweet. But yeah, so I threw myself into that. And it was just this giant secret that I just had to hide. And, I was terrified anyone would find out ever. So moved to Canberra when I was 18. So I didn't know what I wanted to do when I finished school. And so as it turns out, I actually got a job working for the AFL, which the irony's not lost. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's incredible.
The irony's not lost. But so I was up here, and it's just sort of fate. I always wanted to play handball as a kid, but we moved to Albury like 2 months after the Olympics. My mum actually was working on the security for the games. She was in the army. So she was involved in and she wanted to get out of Sydney once the Olympics finished. So I couldn't play handball because there's not much in Australia, and even less, in the country than in the city. There's none. So I moved to Canberra when I was 18. I was working for the AFL, and the gym I was going to had a basketball stadium attached to it. And there was a team training there. And I'd actually seen something in the Canberra Times as well. They did an article on a guy who's a really good mate of mine, and he's my first coach and first national team coach, Tape. He was an Olympian in Sydney. And I remember just one day I was at the gym, and I just sort of went next door and said, what is it? Like, can I play? And I got really, really lucky because I was 19, so I was pretty fit, young, keen, all that sort of stuff. And I walked into the best environment I possibly could have. Like, everyone, so Tape was coaching the national team at that point and was also coaching the Canberra team that was playing in the New South Wales League up in Sydney. And every single Australian player that we had either played for Australia or went on to play for Australia. And, we had a bunch of Europeans there who obviously weren't citizens and couldn't play, but were definitely good enough. So, in that environment, you just can't help but learn and pick it up. And it's really sink or swim. Like, if you can't go, you just and keep up, you just fall by the wayside. So I was really lucky. So I was just like a sponge. And Tape luckily was still national team coach for a number of years, and he was the one who brought me into the national team. So I first played for Australia in 2012, and then played my first World Championships 2013, which was 4 years after I first started playing. Like, it was
that's
ridiculous.
Incredible.
Like, it's ridiculous. And then I loved it. It was great. And it sounds really strange, but the place I feel most at home is in the big events. Like, I think it's just one of those things. Like, I feel at home there. Like, it's where I feel most comfortable. And I definitely choked the first game I played against Hungary. But it was a really good learning curve, because I got myself too amped up for it, and I went, what do I need to do? So I actually did the complete opposite. I tried to put myself asleep the next day, listen to Elton John all day before the game. Like, it's the most boring music I could, or like the most chill music I could, as my pump up music to calm me down. And that's what I've done ever since. And Candle in the Wind, go for it. But it's pump up music, man. It's great. But then, the next day I was really lucky. I went out. We were playing Spain in Madrid, home World Championships. So like, they're up for it. They're pumped. We're playing against some of the guys I'd seen at the Sydney Olympics, which was really cool. One of the goalkeepers was there, and I went out there. I managed to score 4 goals against Spain, which is pretty good, because they ended up winning the World Championship. So, it was a pretty quick development, from never having played to 4 years later playing the World Champions in Madrid. Managed to top score for Australia in that game against them, and from there I was away. I got that confidence. I knew what I had to do, and played over in Kosovo, which was amazing to go through there, and around New Zealand and Australia and places like that too, and then over in Qatar, which was interesting. I had to run away from a sheik for 3 weeks because he thought I owed him 15 grand, but which is a story. But and that was the Olympic qualifiers. So what happened is, our manager, who's one of my best mates, it was great. Whenever we travelled overseas, he'd just go, where do you want to go on the way home? And we'll route everyone's flights through there, and we'll have a holiday. But he couldn't go because he's a teacher, and he'd had too much time off work. So he said, oh, you can just do it. Just take the cash. I'll give you this. And the Qataris wanted everything in cash, right? So I'm like leaving Australia. I've taken out like 30 grand US in cash, got it in my backpack as I'm heading through customs. I was like, I've never seen this much money in my life. Like, and get to Qatar, and I'm sitting in a technical meeting with our coach, who's a Danish guy. And basically in the technical meeting, they go, right, they go through all what's going to go on for the tournament, medical care, protocol for the games, doping control, all that sort of stuff, who's going to wear what and what games. And they've gone, oh, by the way, if you've got sponsors on your uniform, it's 3 grand a logo. And we didn't know that. So we've got 5 of them on there.
Oh, no.
And handball has no money. Like, I've never been paid a cent for any sport ever. We've paid, other than World Championships, I've always paid to go somewhere. Like Olympic qualifiers, we were paying to go. So we got no money. And the guy who was running the Asian Handball Federation was also a Qatari sheik. And he came up to us. He's like, yeah, you owe us 15 grand. And I'm like, well, we haven't got it. He's like, well, you have to. Just get it. Because, what's 15 grand to them, And he was getting really shitty with us. And I'm saying our coach is Danish. He was a good bloke. And we go outside, and he's getting a bit heated about it, right? And it's like 10 or 15 minutes. He goes, look, I come back. I go bathroom, I come back. And I said to our coach, I was like, Jan, we need to leg it.
So to run.
And he's like, we're getting the down to the car right now and going. And he was like, what? No? Okay. So I was like, yeah, come, get in the car. So we got in the car, got back to the hotel. And, like, I'm playing. Like, he knows where I'm going to be, right? So for the next 3 weeks, every time, and he was there, like, because they've got all the VIPs, they've got their seats halfway, they've got these giant thrones over there for them. It was great. And I could see him. He'd come down in the corridors while we were training and stuff like that. And like during training or before training or after the games, I'd have to like hide in the toilet until he was gone, and I just wasn't there. And then we'd go, and I did that for 3 weeks. So then we played that tournament to qualify for Rio, which we didn't qualify, which I was actually really grateful for. It was always a bit of a long shot anyway, but because that was at the point, 2015, so context, the 2013 World Champs, like that was what I'd been working for. I was like, if I can just get to this, that'd be amazing. And, like I said, I'd always thrown myself into sport to, I guess, sort of distract myself from everything else that was going on around my gender and all that sort of stuff. And the really hard thing is when you get to the top of that mountain, what do you shoot for? Like, obviously you keep going. Like, you want to keep going. And, I wanted to have a more consistent World Championships next time. I wanted to, and I'm not saying I had an amazing tournament. It was my first one. I was 23 years old. I definitely, had a lot of improvement in me, and I definitely wasn't our best player by any means. I'm not saying that. But, you tick off such a big goal, and it's like, oh, I got there, okay. And then what happened is those thoughts and the all that stuff around my gender kept coming back in stronger and stronger and stronger, and I kept trying to run away from it, and did the same through 2014, and by the time I got to 2015, I was just a mess. Like I was broken, like I was a mess, and I'd told a really good friend of mine here what was going on, and she's still my best friend to this day, Kayla. She's up in Darwin now, but she knew for a good 6 or 7 months before I told anyone else, and she kept it to herself. And I can't speak highly enough of her and everything she did. And I'd been to the doctor and done all that, so I had all the drugs and stuff that I needed in my car. Initially an anti-androgen, which basically eliminates testosterone. And I think that's something people don't understand either, is trans people have less testosterone than cisgendered women. So, cisgender women have more testosterone than I do. So I think that's just something. But then also, your estrogen and stuff. So one knocks out your testosterone and the other adds estrogen and everything that happens with that. And that was all sitting in my car. And I'd had that, back home in Canberra, and I'd had that sitting there for months, but I didn't want to take it because I didn't want it to affect my performance. But not that it wouldn't have come back as like doping or anything, because it's the opposite of performance enhancing, but I didn't want it to affect my performance and let anyone down. And in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have gone to Qatar, that tournament, but you like, of course you are. It's what you live for. And I thought I'd never do it again. Like at this point, the ISC didn't have
almost, yeah.
Yeah, well, the ISC didn't have any regulations out, so I thought, shit, like I'm never going to do this again. Like I want to, go out on my terms. And as it turned out, and I didn't know this, the ISC came out with their new regulations 3 months after that tournament, like February 2016, and I was like, sweet, I'm back, I'm in.
Yeah. So how did you? How did you tell family? How did you begin that transition?
Yeah, so I stuffed that up a couple of times. So I remember one day we were in Qatar, and I was up in the pool up on the top level of the hotel, and I remember just thinking, like, and it came from nowhere. I don't know where it came from, but I was just like, why don't I just tell her now? This is my mum. She was the one I was the most worried about telling about. Not that, look, I knew she'd be super accepting. I just didn't want her to be upset or worry. Like that was my biggest thing all the time, all the way through. And so I was like, well, why not just do it now? And I knew in that moment I had to take that moment, because if I let it pass, I wouldn't have done it, because I would have been too scared again. So I got out of the pool, went down to grab my phone from my room, and just shot off this message that I thought was super concise, really concise, to the point, very well put. I reread it later on. It was the most rambling piece of shit you've ever seen, but the message got through. She understood what I meant. And she messaged back, and she was great. Like she was really supportive. She was great. And I didn't tell anyone else till I got home. So Lucas came good. I was seeing AC/DC in Perth, so he routed our flights through Perth. And I touched down in Perth, and I was like, all right, I don't have it in me to tell people verbally, so I'm going to have to. And that was part of it. Like I just didn't have it in me, so I had to write something. And I wrote this message in notes in my phone, right? That I would just copy and paste and send. But I was like, well, I'm not just going to send it point blank, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to message someone and message people and say, hey, I need to talk to you about something, and then copy and paste this message in. So I said that to my brother. One of my brothers, I said, I need to talk to you about something. And I went, prepared it, copy and pasted the message. As he replied, my dad texted me about something totally different. And you know how that comes up at the banner at the top? Like when the message comes in? I went and hit that thinking it was my brother, it was my dad, and I just hit it and sent it. Gone. And then I realized I sent it without the I need to talk to you about something.
Without the explainer,
Yeah, I went, oh no. So I turned my phone off, got an ice cream, went saw AC/DC, and turned it on 6 hours later. But look, he was great. I've never had a bad response from anyone. Like he's great. He's so supportive. He was a bit confused to begin with, like 70-year-old army officer will be, but He was so supportive, and I know that like he reached out to Kate McGregor, who was also in the army for a while, and all this sort of stuff. And my brother's really great. So, I can't say I've had a negative response from anyone who matters.
So you begin hormone therapy, am I right to say, November 2015?
Yeah.
You publicly identify as female in May 2016. So the IOC rules mean that you needed to have 12 months of hormone therapy.
Yeah.
You get the levels below at that stage, the 10 nanomoles per litre level
Yeah.
by July 2016.
Yeah.
How did you...
No, I mean, the way the medication works, it does it almost immediately.
Really?
Like, so yeah, you could go 3 or 4 days on this medication, your testosterone's gone. And I mean like below measurable levels. Like they can't measure it, there's that little in it. So I was below it pretty much immediately. And really the only reason I didn't do it, like I guess I transitioned probably officially in, I guess, I don't know, May or something, June, whatever it was. Really just because I needed to give the hormones time to work, and I had really short hair, so I needed to grow it out a bit. But that was really the only reason why I did that. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is around the time you start thinking, I'm going to play football. How did that come about, Hannah?
Football was the next year.
With Ainsley?
Yeah. So football was the next year. And I didn't really ever think about playing football at that point. It's just that, I mean, this is a really hard thing to go through. Like anyone who's trans and gone through this transition, like you can't describe how hard it is because one, you're terrified, you're navigating new ground, but you also, you lose a lot of people, like you do.
Yeah.
Like when I say I never got a negative response from anyone who mattered, that's not to say I didn't get negative responses. And generally, it's not overt to your face, like we're not supportive. They'll tell you they're supportive, but they're not, and then they drift away, and it's a really confusing time. So with football, I just needed to meet some new people. Like that's literally all it was. And when I moved to Canberra in 2018, I played for Ainsley. I went and played for Ainsley, and even that was a bit of a weird season because I went and I'd done a bit of a pre-season with Eastlake, and then I was working with a guy who was playing for Ainsley. He said, why don't you just come here? Because like to the point, like the coach of Eastlake at that time, I'm sure he's a good bloke, but he scared me. He was insane. Like I'm sure he's a good bloke. Nutter was mental. But I'm sure he's a really good bloke, but he scared the shit out of me. So I was like, yeah, I'm out. I'm going to Ainsley. Like, why not? And that was great. And then I went and did first game in a practice match, actually. Like I got to the club and I played a practice match in the thirds like 2 days later because I'd literally just rocked up. And I really badly injured my hip and I was off for like 10 weeks and came back, and it was a bit of a weird season, but they were really great people. And they were really, really great people. And I was still training with like the senior squad and stuff, but halfway through the season, hadn't done a pre-season, injured myself 2 days after getting to the club. So it was a bit of a write-off, but yeah, and that was it. And I'd also assistant coached an ACT under 12 team where there was a few Ainsley people around too, and went away with, and the parents were the parents were Ainsley people. I got to know them really well. So come 2017, I'm still friends with some of these people on Facebook and stuff. And I just messaged, I was just like, do you reckon I could play? Like, I don't know, but do you reckon I could? Because I just want to meet some new people. And they're like, yeah, come down. Look for Fee. She's the coach. She's great. And she's awesome. And I went down there and that was pretty much it. I just went down to go meet some new people. So, I played that 2017. I played half a season in 2017 with Ainsley because I was going to Europe in the second half of the season. So, like, I'd had no plans on playing football because I booked this trip to Europe. And I played this half a season, or maybe a little bit more than half a season. And, it was in that time where the AFLW had just kicked off. There'd been one season of it. And it was during that time going into the second season where I'd been involved with like one of the ACT rep teams. It was playing in Wagga or something. I can't remember who it was against, Riverina or something. I don't know. And someone from Melbourne just messaged me, and not Melbourne the club, just from Melbourne messaged me and said like, "Oh, would you be keen in playing AFLW?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah," because my theory's always been, I'm not going to say no to something I would say yes to just because I'm trans. Like, that's stupid. So I was like, well, if someone said to me 5 years ago, would you be keen on playing AFL? Yeah, I would. So I was like, all right, I'll go give it a go. So I flew down to Melbourne, and I trialled with Melbourne one night. They had a thing on down there. Yep. Which was good. It sat really funny on the flight. It was a really flight, and even though it was only an hour, I got up and I couldn't move very well. So we were doing the sprints, and I sort of hurt my groin a bit, so I couldn't do the 2K. Sad, but that was the thing they did last after the sprints. So I was like, oh, I missed that. So they asked me back to come to the second lot they had after they culled everyone down, but I was already in Europe, so I was like, sorry guys, I can't. But while I was in Melbourne that morning, because it all came together really quickly. Tim Hazel, who was at Vivid, he was managing me. He's like, yeah, I'll manage you, cool. And so he'd lined up a meeting with Collingwood that morning, and they were really keen. Collingwood was super keen. I think it was Matty James who was there at the time, the umpire. Is that his name? I think. He was an umpire for a long time. Yeah, he was the list manager, and he was super keen. He was like, if we hadn't used our second category B last week, I'd sign you now. And then, so I met with Collingwood, and they were really keen. And then later on, I can't remember how it came about, but I had a couple of meetings with Bulldogs as well. And that was really good. Collingwood I only met with once, but I know they were super keen. Bulldogs I met with once. I went and had a kick out in the western suburbs somewhere near Whitten Oval. It wasn't at Whitten Oval. But we went and had a kick and did some marking and stuff down there, and that went pretty well. And then I went actually into the club maybe, and this is after I got back from Europe, and then I went into the club, went through the facilities a bit, had a chat to Grovesy, who was the coach.
Yep.
He was an awesome dude. I actually ran into him in Darwin last year. He's a really cool guy. They were pretty keen. So I stayed in touch with the Bulldogs quite a bit. They were keen. I knew going into the draft, either Collingwood or the Bulldogs would take me. It was just a matter of who got in first. And I'm almost certain it would have been the Bulldogs. But it was funny. Like, I remember having a chat to, I can't remember the list manager's name at Bulldogs now. He's a nice guy. And I remember him saying to me, he's like, we just have no idea where you're going to go. Because in Canberra, they weren't recording the games at that point. So there's no footage. But so all they were really going off was having seen me in Melbourne and having a kick and doing the stuff with the Ds. Because the Ds weren't interested because they were like too slow. Like, for our game style, too slow. And you can see it. They were going all skinny, fast. Like, I'm not that. So I knew Melbourne wasn't keen. But he was saying to me, he was like, look, you might go top 5. You might go to the rookie draft. We have no idea. Like, we have absolutely no idea. So it was really just going to be who got in first. And I think it was going to be a matter of, because they knew who was going to go top 3. It was Conti, Malloy, who else was it? There was one other, I can't remember. And they're like, you could go top 5, you could go rookie draft. We have no idea. So it was a bit of an unknown, but I know too, like Danny Craven, who used to play for St Kilda, he's up in Brisbane. He knew Peter Blucher, who was Tim's boss at Vivid. So I knew Danny through handball. His kids played handball, and his daughter-in-law plays handball, and so I knew Danny through that. And we'd spoken about footy a little bit previously, and he was sort of sussing out Brisbane a little bit. But to their credit, they saw the writing on the wall and said, you know what? There might be a bit of a distraction that comes with this. So maybe
you live in your car, you sort of bounce around between friends' places, you're thinking you're a really good chance. And then the AFL starts calling in for some meetings. You sort of, I think you provided some data to them to show that your testosterone levels were close to 0. So what's happening as you're approaching the draft, thinking, I'm going to get picked, but I'm not sure whether the AFL will allow it? knowing, of course, that there is no policy in place at that stage.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. So we'd already had it ticked off by the AFL. It was all
Really?
fine. Yeah,
Yep.
so Simon Leflane, he was the one that was approached, and he was no issues, no dramas, don't see the problem. So
You're fine. Yeah, absolutely. You're
yeah, from
fine.
our perspective, it was fine. But then obviously he left the AFL, in between us contacting him and then that draft happening. And then I don't know who took over his role, but obviously there was some conversations had. And I remember I got a phone call quite a while later, because I think that was in June or July when we'd approached him, or maybe even May. And I got a phone call from Tanya Hosh on the grand final public holiday, 2017. I remember it.
Yep.
Because it was 4:00 Friday afternoon on public holiday. So if you've got to deliver bad news, that's when you do it.
That's the bad news time, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I really feel for Tanya, because I really think she was put up to do all the dirty work, and it wasn't. And I actually think she was advocating quite strongly for me to play. So I know. So she rang me and she said, "Look, we want to review your nomination for the draft," which I already knew that the decision's been made, but we need to go through a process. Is basically what I took from that. So. I was actually in Port Augusta at the time, because my dad was taking jobs that no one wanted in the army to stay in. So he was running the range at Port Augusta, and so I'd been over there for a couple of weeks just with him, because my dogs are over there, and and so I drove over to Melbourne to meet with the AFL. Got to give it to them; they put me in a very, very nice hotel at Docklands, so they really did. Spare no expense in
Let
that
you
one.
down gently, yeah.
Yeah, that was great. So anyway, I went to this meeting, and it was. I remember meeting with Blooch and Tim beforehand, sort of talking about it, how we go about it, and we're all sort of on the same view, where it's like, pretty sure this decision's already been made, but we've got to give it our best. So walked in there, and there was no policy in place by the AFL. And our argument was, well, I've already been playing. You've already allowed me to play. If you're going to allow me to play in Canberra, it would make sense that you allow me to play here. I offered to them, because knowing there was no process, I said, look, this is the IOC policy. And our logic was, if it's good enough for the Olympics, it's good enough for the AFL, because the Olympics also covers rugby sevens. It covers handball, both very, very physical sports. It covers everything. But particularly those two, which are probably the two most physical sports at the Olympics. And the AFL sort of went, well, we're not the Olympics. Our game's different. We're going to not use that. So I offered, because I get blood tests monthly just to show my testosterone is non-existent, which I still do now, which is a bit silly. But and I only say it's silly because once you've had, all your surgery and that, like, you can't produce it.
Yeah.
Like, I can't produce testosterone, but I still do it anyway. And even then, like, it was the same thing. So but I just did it because I was like, well, I'm going to get the tests anyway, because at least then I can say I've done it. And I can give them something. So I offered it to the AFL, and I can't remember if they took it or not, but they weren't really interested in how we were, because the way they phrased it was, let's have a chat, we'll work it out. Like, we want to hear your side of things, but I don't think they particularly did.
Do you remember who was in the room? Who was in the room with you the moment?
Yeah, Josh Vanderloo was there. I know that. I can't remember who else. I know Tanya was on the phone from Adelaide, and they were the main two leading it. But, so they weren't really keen for what we were presenting, which is fine. Like, that's what it is. And I didn't think they would take everything we said and run with it. Like, who would? But we also went in with a list of, because the AFLW weights aren't listed, but the heights are. And I went, well, here's 20 girls who are my height or taller or within 2 or 3 centimetres on lists at the moment, to say, look, this is not abnormal. My height is not abnormal. I can't give you the weight because that's not publicly available, but, giving them what we can. But the really interesting one, and the one that really showed to me, I think the decision was made long before I got to, and look, I could be wrong, but the next day I went back in, and there were two on the AFL board at the time. There were 2 women on the board, and I can't remember who they were. I want to say Gabby Traynor was one, and then there was
AFL commissioner.
There was someone else. It wasn't Sam Mostyn because she was with Sydney, and I remember talking to her later on, but and totally unrelated, but it was about like just Sydney Pride games and stuff. So I know it wasn't her, but they sat me in a room and they both sat me down and they went, so we want to know what your biggest strength is, that you think your biggest strength is on the field. And I said to them, look, honestly, I think I grew up playing football and I've got a background in elite sports. So I've trained and I know how to use my body. I've trained for years, just like any number of the girls who had come across from other sports, like Chloe Dalton had come across from rugby, Georgie Parker had come across from hockey, Erin Phillips had come across from basketball. So I was like, I think that's a huge advantage is I've been in that environment, but also I grew up playing football. So I know how to read it and this and this. And they're like, oh, okay, but what else do you think is your biggest advantage? I went, well, honestly, like I'm 6 foot, but I actually play pretty well on the ground. And I'm not taking a piss there. Like I at that time, probably not now because I'm a bit older, but at the time I was like, my ability on the ground to pick up the ball and use the skills from handball to work in really confined spaces. I was like, that's my biggest skill. And they're like, yeah, okay, but what's your actual biggest skill? And I was like, I don't know, I'm pretty good at contested marking, I guess. And they're like, yeah, cool, thanks. We'll see you now. And I was like, okay, so that's what they wanted to hear. And it was just once I went to that, and they were like, they just wanted me to say I could take a contested mark, to say, oh, see, look, size and all this, and then I was on my way. And
they wanted to find reasons to be able to disqualify you.
Yeah. And so, and that was what it was. So I went away, and that was a couple of weeks, I think, before. I can't remember. It felt like it was a couple of weeks, but it might have only been 10 days or something before the announcement was made on whether I would be able to play. And it was all meant to be kept confidential and stuff. And obviously it wasn't. But I found out. So obviously the decision came through the day before the draft. I can't remember what day the draft was, like 15th or 16th of October. I found out the day before. The AFL, I actually found out through the media. So the AFL didn't tell me before they held the press conference. So, or technically they did, but what had happened is they'd sent me an email at like 3:45 maybe, or 3:30 or whatever it was. And the press conference was held 15 minutes later.
Yeah.
So I just didn't see the email because they literally sent the email and then 10, 15 minutes later, the press conference happened. So I actually found out. I was walking through a shopping centre in Albury and it came up on the TV and I was like, oh, cool. All right, I'm not going to play. Thanks, guys. And that was pretty much it. So,
and what was the explanation to you? What was their rationale?
I'm still yet to receive that.
Yeah.
So I never actually received it. After the decision was made, I heard very, very little from the AFL. And it was very difficult for me to have any communication with the AFL after that decision was made. So I still haven't been given a reason, not formally anyway. I haven't been given one at all. But, I think the assumption there is, I think the assumption from a lot of people is they're concerned about obviously some sort of advantage that was there. I've been told by people who were close to it that the equal concern or even a bigger concern to that was the AFLW is a year old. We don't want this sideshow destroying it. And they were worried about the commercial viability and the commercial impact that my playing would have on sponsors. And particularly at that time, they were using the AFLW as a tool to really encourage girls to play footy, junior footy and Auskick and stuff like that. And from what I've been told from people who are at the AFL but not involved in the decision was that what everyone had heard was it was essentially we're worried about the commercial side of it. We're worried about it impacting parents' decisions to allow their daughters to play junior footy or Auskick in case they play against a trans person. Because if we set this precedent now, we have to then let every trans person play at every level. But that was, off the record told to me by people who were at the AFL but weren't in the room. But I've actually never received anything from the AFL about a reason.
And you became not persona non grata, but someone they were scared of. So they spoke to you and communicated to you through lawyers, and you never had the meeting you would have loved to with Andrew with Gillan McLaughlin to sort of explain your situation or to build some kind of relationship with the AFL.
Yeah, I never asked for it, but look, it's. I think persona non grata was definitely accurate, because maybe I lack some tact sometimes, but if someone asks me a question, I just give an answer. And I think maybe I was probably a bit blunt for their liking, and I think they sort of wanted me to go away. And, at the time too, it was one of those things where, I was still, during this whole thing, I was still bouncing around all different places in my car. So I sort of needed a job, and that was half the reason I went, yeah, cool, I'll play AFL because there's at least some money coming in. I have somewhere to live. Cool, I'll set back up. So I had nothing to lose, and it was interesting. So it became the shit show that it was, and then I ended up in Melbourne. Was working in Melbourne out at Ringwood. And ended up playing obviously for Darebin the next year, which was great because I was able to. And this was the confusing thing: I was still able to play every competition but AFLW, and that's where
it seems bizarre.
Yeah, and that's where if it wasn't for that, I would have given the idea that it was for commercial reasons. I wouldn't have given it a second thought. But when you're allowed to play everywhere else but not AFLW, it actually gives a lot of credence to that, I think. And I played at Darebin, and I loved it. And the thing is, and this is why I say it made no sense, our team was full of AFL listed players. So all the opposition. Our midfield was Paxi, Elise O'Day, Lauren Pearce in the ruck. Who else was there? Meg McDonald was down back. Lily Mitham. It was an AFL team.
Yeah, it's an AFLW team, isn't it? And they were all supportive of you.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, they were awesome. And my only real regret from that time is I sort of wish I'd been able to integrate myself more into the club. But I was very wary of. It was just such a strange situation, because I really love those girls. It was brilliant, and the club couldn't have been better. But I walked in, everyone knew who I was. I didn't know anyone. And I am the most controversial thing in Australia at that point. And I also didn't know, I didn't want the girls sort of to get in trouble for being too close to me. So I sort of kept my distance a bit, get in trouble with their AFL clubs, because I know there'd been things, don't comment, don't talk. So I just totally backed out. And I think they probably thought I was being a bit aloof or arrogant or something, but it wasn't. It was such an awkward thing, a situation, not the club, but such an awkward situation for me to be in just in general with everything in the media. And then I didn't want to get them in trouble with their clubs and stuff by being too close to them and all that. But I love them. It was so much fun.
What the AFL has obviously done with you and other rules that have changed. Are you worried that has scared some transgender athletes away from local community sport, which 100%. Is obviously that's obviously what you're concerned about now. And
yeah, absolutely. It would have scared them away. Of course it has. And it also has the other effect of if you've got athletes who are trans and they, and they don't transition or don't do what they need to at any given time to protect their career, how damaging is that to someone's health? And it does have the ability to drive people to really dark mental places. And, the emphasis that's on mental health right now and has been for years, but, it's horrific. So I think, if we're actually genuine about mental health and all that sort of stuff, you would make it a lot more accessible across the board.
Yeah. What's your message to the new IOC boss, Kirsty Coventry? So she says there is overwhelming support amongst IOC members to protect the female category in what, as The Guardian says, is a significant shift in its gender eligibility policy. So a task force of scientists and international federations will set up to come up with a new policy. Hannah, what's your message to Kirsty Coventry?
Look, I think there is pressure and support, but it's from a vocal minority. I think we know that FINA who's a swimming governing body, are obviously, they've made their bans on trans people, as has the IAAF, who are two very, like, swimming and athletics, like, how big is that in the Olympics? So they're obviously key stakeholders. There's obviously huge pressure from the United States government there, as hosts of the next Olympics, and they're very anti-trans anyway, and from the UK. But I think the thing is, though, it's very much a problem only in a select few countries, and really the English-speaking world. I think the evidence is there in that if there was this problem of trans people having an unfair advantage, we would know it by now in the results, but we don't have it. I come back to the doping example I used before. You can't ban, like, unless you're going to, if you think that people who dope are allowed to compete again after they've served their ban, you can't put a blanket ban on trans people because they haven't done anything wrong. And also you're saying too that you believe there's no advantage from the doping after 4 years. So I think that's a key point. I think as well, people are very picky in the research that they use at any given time. So if I look at Caster Semenya, for example, the IAAF commissioned research years ago into testosterone suppression and and the effects that it has on performance. What it showed is that testosterone suppression significantly reduces performance and brings it into the female range. So, and they use that specifically to force Caster Semenya to take testosterone suppressing medication because they believe that would bring her and level the playing field. They're now ignoring that research because if they acknowledge it, it means they have to allow trans people to compete. And so I think that's a real issue. But it also, if you think that people are good at sport just because they're trans, it's such a simplistic view. And I use myself as an example, right? Like, I'm 30, I'm 35. And, obviously there is some natural ability there, like you have to, but work ethic is so much more than talent. And we've all seen examples of people with all the talent in the world who don't put the work in and fall by the wayside and don't go anywhere. So, from my perspective, I look at, I'm 35 years old. I'm still trying to innovate with new shots that I'm bringing in handball, for example. I'm stealing them from cricket, bringing it out the back of the hand to lob keepers and stuff from different positions. And, and that's something I've sort of worked on over the last year. You're still in the gym every day, training, all that sort of thing. And if you're not putting in the work, you don't get anywhere. But it's also like the mental side of performance. Like, you need to know your game inside out. And that's something I've put a lot of work into, is knowing, I'm going to get a lot of attention. The first 15 minutes of the game while they're fresh, I'm probably going to be pretty quiet because I've got so much attention on me. Don't stress. The last 45 minutes when they're tired, because handball goes for an hour, when they start to tire and space opens up, that's my time. So, and knowing who to target, what times of the game to target. Like, there's so much more that goes into it that people just don't acknowledge. So I think, there's so many reasons, but I would just say I think if you're going to put a blanket ban in place, the other thing it does too is the Olympic movement's meant to be sport for all, right? In this instance, it's not. If you put a blanket ban in, it's sport for cisgender people and transgender people, and intersex people are then excluded, and so suddenly the Olympic movement loses a lot of credibility as well.
Your thoughts. We better let you go, but your thoughts on the local communities. There's been a trans debate with the netballer in the Melton and Central districts. It's the Sex Discrimination Act comes into play there. Other teams complaining. Well, you can understand that people don't understand. You can understand that some people are scared about it all, but it seems to be trickling down all the way to the bottom, which is worrying for trans people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I do very much understand that people don't know. Like, that's totally fine and normal. Like, there's so many things that I don't know about that, I don't expect people to be experts in trans issues and know everything going on if they're not affected by it. Like, who would be? But in this instance, like, I think what does happen and what is happening is people are choosing to weaponize the systems that are in place to actually attack trans people with protection. And that was something I raised with the AFL very early on as well. I raised it. I said, look, if you've got these, complaints procedures in place to say this person's not safe, we don't want to play against this person. What safeguards have you got in place to make sure that people aren't just going, shit, we're playing finals soon. We don't want to play against this person. And we're seeing that happen. Obviously, look, I don't know what the go is with the netball thing. I know of it. I can't say that in that instance is 100% what it is, but I know that those systems across the board are open to abuse, and there definitely need to be checks and balances in place. And yeah, I think too, like, not leaving it to people who, it's really unfair on local leagues and stuff and league presidents and stuff, because they're not the people who should be making these decisions because they don't know. It's unfair on them too. So I think all these decisions need to go to a higher body, someone who's dedicated to this specifically as part of their role. That's it. Or I actually think the whole thing should be taken over by Sport Integrity Australia, if I'm honest. Like, that's probably the best way to do it, because it's neutral from all sports. Integrity is their thing, and that's who I would like to see take over it, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Last one from us. Has it all been worth it? The fight, the dramas, the drain on your mental health to still be able to play sport at the highest level as a trans person?
Do you know what? Like, the fight is hard. Like, I can't. What makes me good as an athlete is also the thing that's probably my downfall outside of that, and that is I can't walk away from a fight. Like, I enjoy it. I enjoy the confrontation, I guess, sometimes, and the competition. And I need to pull myself from that. Not to say that I enjoy going on TV or something and complaining or whatever. Like, that's not what it's about. But, I've had such a good run. Like, 10 years ago in Qatar, I thought I was done. I've gone and got to meet some amazing people, got to do some really cool things. There's obviously been challenges to it, but, I also wonder what things would be like. Like, I just say yes to everything, and it's been really cool. Like, I mean, I got to play tennis. I've never played tennis in my life. I got to play tennis on finals day at the Australian Open. That was pretty cool. Playing against Casey Delacqua, that didn't go well. But, like, it's you get to do some really cool things outside of just I get to go play sport in front of all these people and the competition and whatever. So yeah, I'd do it again.
Hannah Mouncey, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Hannah.
No worries. Thanks for that, guys.